Welcome back. In part 3 of A Blade Between Us, Eliza and Thomas arrive in Philadelphia on the edge of a dangerous meeting that could change the course of the war. Loyalties will be tested, old betrayals exposed, and the blade between them may finally be drawn, or laid to rest. Let's continue. Philadelphia was too quiet for a city on the verge of war. From the second-floor window of an inn across the narrow lane, Eliza pressed her fingertips to the glass, fogging the pane with her breath. The buildings across from them, a shuttered warehouse with boarded windows and a rusted lantern swinging in the wind, looked like any other, but the men slipping inside said otherwise. One by one they arrived, each carriage unmarked, each figure cloaked in civilian gray. The meeting had begun. Behind her, Thomas moved with quiet precision, checking his flint and powder. "There," she said softly, pointing. "That's the one." He stepped to her side, following her gaze. A heavy-set man with a sharp gait had just exited a hackney, flanked by two younger men who looked out of place amid the grime of the street. The leader's coat bore no insignia, but his face was unmistakable. "Major Marks," Thomas said, his jaw tightening. Eliza's eyes scanned the rest of the party. Then she stilled. One of the men, the one standing slightly apart, holding his hat in both hands, was familiar. Too familiar. Nathaniel Ward. A name from her girlhood. A friend of her father's. "What is it?" Thomas asked, studying her face. "Ward," she breathed, staggering back a step from the window. That's not possible." Thomas moved to steady her. "You know him?" She nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on the figure below. "He used to come to our house, sat at our table, praised my writing. He even hugged me when my dog died. My father swore by him." Thomas followed her gaze, his voice darkening. "I see betrayal isn't foreign to him." The clock on the mantel clicked towards 6:30. The plan had to begin. Thomas shouldered his coat and checked the pack at his feet. Oil, rags, tinder. Just enough to make a show of danger without signaling a targeted strike. "This has to rattle them," he said, "not spook them. The fire will draw them out. Enough for you to get inside while they scramble." Eliza nodded, her hand tightening around the cipher now folded in her coat pocket. She had read it until the ink bled into her vision. What they held in those papers could gut the Loyalist conspiracy from the inside, if she could get to it in time. "I'll be back in 10 minutes, Thomas said. 15 if someone starts playing the hero." Eliza turned to him. "And if you don't come back?" He looked at her then, not with bravado, but with the raw steadiness he'd come to recognize in him. "Then you know what you have to do." Her throat tightened. They hadn't spoken of what waited beyond this night. There hadn't been time. But as he reached for the door, her hand caught his arm. "Thomas." He paused, looking down at her fingers on his sleeve. "I don't want to lose you again." He nodded once, sharply. Then, surprising them both, he leaned in and kissed her cheek. It wasn't a soldier's goodbye. It was softer than that, almost reverent. "Don't lose your nerve," he murmured. "I'll come find you." Then he was gone, boots fading down the stairs, swallowed by the cold night that waited, still and watching, like a fuse yet to be lit. The fire started with a whisper. From her place in the shadows beside the warehouse, Eliza saw the first lick of orange flare in the alley a block away. It caught on dry timber stacked against a butcher's wall. No threat to lives, just enough to send up smoke and scatter the watchmen. Within moments, shouts echoed across the narrow streets. Men swore and boots pounded as buckets were called for. The warehouse door creaked open from within. Marks and his conspirators began to stir. Eliza kept to the side, hood low, heart hammering against her ribs. She moved with practiced precision, slipping through the side entry before the main doors opened wide. Inside, the air was thick with old sawdust and oil. Shadows loomed large across the floor where crates were stacked waist-high, a scattering of lanterns giving off a dim amber haze. She heard voices, low, urgent. The fire had rattled them. Above, a narrow staircase climbed toward what looked like a small loft office. She slipped upward, one hand bracing the wall to silence her boots against the steps. The wood creaked once under her heel. She froze, breath caught. Nothing stirred below. The office door was cracked open. Inside, a roll-top desk stood beneath a slanted window, and beside it, a leather satchel lay atop a ledger book. She moved quickly, trusting instinct over thoroughness. Inside the satchel were 2 sealed message packets, bound in wax-stamped cord. She recognized the British seal, distinct, pressed in red. She didn't know what was inside, but the seal, the placement, the care with which it had been set aside told her enough. Whatever it was, someone had meant to protect it. She stuffed one into her coat and turned to go. But as she turned, her hip caught the edge of a wood chair tucked beneath the desk. It tipped and crashed sideways, slamming to the floor with a clatter that echoed like a gunshot through the rafters. She swore under her breath and froze. Voices rose below, sharp, confused, and too close. Footsteps creaked against the bottom stair. Her eyes darted around the room. No other exits, no wardrobe, no crawl space, no place to hide. Panic clawed up her throat. Then she saw it, the window. She rushed to it, yanking it open just as the first footfall landed on the stairs behind her. The night air slapped her cheeks, sharp and cold. She climbed onto the ledge, heart in her throat, and looked down. A narrow eave, then a 10-foot drop into a hay cart half covered by canvas. No time to hesitate. The fall knocked the wind from her chest, but the hay broke her landing. She rolled out off the cart and sprinted into the dark, slipping between alleys until the warehouse lights disappeared behind her. She didn't stop running until she reached the edge of the city square, lungs burning, heart pounding beneath her ribs. Breathless, she pressed a hand to her chest, more to steady herself than anything, and froze. The chain was there, but the locket, the one that had belonged to her mother, was gone. Her fingers grasped at empty air, skin chilled where it should have been warm. Somewhere in that warehouse, or on the stairs, or in the hay, she'd lost it. The print shop smelled of ink and ash and something older. Wood smoke. Memory. It had belonged to Eliza's father once. Now it was empty, dustier, the press idle, its iron frame rusting in silence. But it was safe, or as safe as any place in Philadelphia could be. Eliza paced the back room with the message packet clenched in her hands. The coat she wore was torn at the elbow, and her palms were still scraped from the landing, which she barely noticed. The fire had worked. The conspirators had scattered, and now, at last, she had something to show for it. The locket was gone. She tried not to think about it. She could still feel the phantom weight against her throat, but the chain now ended in nothing. A hollow ache nestled just beneath her breastbone, but she shoved it aside. It wasn't the time. The back door creaked open, and Thomas stepped inside, ducking his head against the wind. He looked like hell, face streaked with soot, a small burn along his forearm, but he was standing. "Eliza?" he called. She stepped into view. "Here." Relief passed through him like breath. He crossed the room and looked her over quickly. Hands, face, the way her coat clung to her shoulders. "You all right?" "I got it," she said, holding up the packet. They didn't waste time. Together they opened it at the work table by the printing press, laying out the pages one by one. Thin parchment, crisply folded, bearing the red wax seal of British military command. Inside were names, columns of them. Some were merchant aliases, easily overlooked, but others weren't. Samuel Adams, John Hancock, Benjamin Eustace, and further down, George Washington. The plans weren't just for troop movement or supply lines. They were orders. Kill orders. "A coordinated series of assassinations," Thomas said, voice flat, eyes scanning line after line. "They want to cripple the Continental movement from the inside. Cut off the head." Eliza leaned over the page, heart thudding louder now than when she jumped from the window. These are the Sons of Liberty. Every one of them. And beneath that, locations, meeting times, routes. It wasn't just treason. It was sabotage on a national scale. But her breath caught at one more name, not listed as a target, but as a courier. Nathaniel Ward, Philadelphia, local attaché. Her eyes scanned the page again. She wasn't mistaken. "Ward was meant to deliver this," she said quietly. "He's not just involved, he's essential." Thomas leaned in beside her. "You're certain?" She nodded. "That note at the bottom. My father used to copy it line for line. It's Nathaniel's handwriting, I'd swear it." Her voice broke slightly, but her expression didn't. "All those evenings, all the dinners. He held me on his knee when I was small." Thomas's hand curled around the edge of the table, knuckles white. "We need to move," he said finally. "Get this to Washington's men tonight. If they intercept it..." "No." Eliza stepped back, shaking her head. "No, I'm not walking away from this. Not when I have a name. Not when I can put a blade where it belongs." "Eliza." "He betrayed my father," she snapped. "I won't just hand this off and hide." Thomas crossed to her. "We're not hiding. But this packet holds more than vengeance. These names, these roots. If they aren't delivered, men die. The rebellion loses its heart." "So does mine." The words burst from her like steam from a cracked pipe. Her fists were clenched, shoulders trembling. "You don't get to ask me to let this go. Not after everything." He was quiet for a moment, the fire between them cooling to something raw and real. "I'm not asking you to let it go," he said softly. "Just not yet." She didn't respond. "You want revenge," he added. "But right now we need justice." A beat. Her breath shook. "I'll help you stop him," he said. "But first, we finish what we started." She looked at him, eyes still burning, but nodded once. Not in surrender, in delay. And then, a sound outside. Footsteps. Close. Deliberate. Thomas turned toward the door, already drawing his blade. Eliza's voice was barely above a whisper. "It's not over." The door creaked once, then swung open. Two men stepped into the print shop, neither bothering to hide their faces. The first, dressed in a fine wool coat, unbuttoned as though he owned the room, held something small between his fingers. A silver locket, its chain dangling, catching the lamplight. "You left this behind," Nathaniel Ward said calmly, letting it sway once before closing his fist around it. Beside him, the second man raised a flintlock pistol low at his side, eyes already sweeping the shadows. Eliza's blood went cold. "Nathaniel," she spat. He met her gaze. He had aged, lines at the corners of his mouth, silver at the temples, but his eyes were still the same familiar blue. Cold now, assessing. "I told them you were bright," he said, voice low and unhurried. But you never did learn to stop digging. Thomas stepped forward, placing himself between Eliza and the intruders. His knife was out, angled downward, steady. Ward's companion raised his pistol slightly in warning, but Nathaniel extended a hand. "No need for blood," he said. "Give me the packet. Walk away." "You know I can't do that," Thomas said. Nathaniel sighed. "You can. You're just choosing not to." Then his gaze shifted back to Eliza. He tilted his head, almost gentle. "Your father could have lived, you know. He had connections, respect. All he had to do was stay quiet. But he got caught up in ideals. Died for a cause that won't see another spring." Something flickered in her expression. "He died because someone handed his name over," she said slowly. "Someone who sat at our table, who prayed with us, who put flowers on my mother's grave." Nathaniel's jaw tensed. He wasn't the first man who let his convictions blind him. Eliza stepped forward. Thomas reached to stop her, but her hand was already at her side, fingers curling around the hilt beneath her coat. Nathaniel saw the movement, but too late. She lunged. The blade flashed in the lamplight, clean and fast, and sank into his gut with a sick, wet sound. He gasped, eyes going wide, hands instinctively grabbing at her arms. Eliza stepped in, close, twisting the knife once, her face a storm of fury and grief. Nathaniel dropped to his knees. His companion surged forward, shouting, but Thomas was faster. He drove his shoulder into the man's chest, knocking the pistol aside as the shot fired wild. The two men crashed into the wall. The pistol clattered to the floor. Thomas grunted once, then shoved the man back, slashing across his ribs. Blood spattered the press behind them. The attacker snarled, pulling a hidden blade, and lunged. Thomas took the blade to the side, a clean puncture beneath the ribs, but drove his own knife upward into the man's throat before they both fell, tangled to the floor. Silence dropped like a stone. Nathaniel gurgled once, blood on his lips. He slumped sideways, motionless. Thomas lay on his back, arm pressed to his wound, jaw clenched against the pain. Eliza turned, her breath catching. "Thomas!" "I'm fine," he said, which was a lie. His face had gone pale and his hand was slick with blood. She dropped to her knees beside him, tearing off her outer coat and pressing it to his side. "You're not fine. You're not fine." "I've had worse," he muttered. "Stop talking." Her voice cracked. "You'll make it worse." Their hands met, his bloodied, hers shaking. "Look at me," she whispered. His eyes met hers, and she saw him fighting to stay conscious. "You're not dying tonight." "I wasn't planning to," he rasped, trying to smile. She brushed his head from his forehead, her other hand still pressing hard to the wound. "We've come too far. I'm not losing you now." He exhaled, slow and trembling. "You didn't lose anything," he said. "You saved it." Outside, the wind howled past the broken door. Inside, Eliza held him in the growing quiet, her heartbeat louder than the storm. It was 2 days before Thomas could sit upright without cursing. They'd hidden out in a farmhouse on the edge of the city, tucked behind a dry goods shed with no name on the door. A Patriot courier had ridden out the night after the ambush and taken the packet north, bound for Washington's camp. Word came back just that morning. The names had been verified, the Loyalist plot exposed, and several conspirators taken in the night. A powder keg diffused. Thomas watched the fire from a chair near the hearth, his shirt unbuttoned, bandages tight around his ribs. The blade hadn't pierced the lung, barely missed the liver. The second best luck of his life, he said. The first, he added, was Eliza not running. She stood at the table, steaming water in a tin basin, washing the blood from her hands for the last time. Her locket was gone, but she'd stopped mourning it. Something new filled the space now. "You're staring," she said, without looking back. "I'm breathing," he replied. "You're in my line of sight." She glanced over her shoulder. Her eyes were softer than he remembered. Not gentler, just less guarded. "Word is you're wanted in Washington's ranks now," she said. "But you're still a traitor in half the colonies. That's a dangerous ride." Thomas nodded. "I'll take it." She turned toward him, towel still in her hands. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he added, "if you come with me." Her brows lifted. "You think I'd follow you?" "No," he said. "I think you'd walk beside me, and probably outpace me." She smiled, but it faded quickly. The fire crackled behind him. She crossed the room, stood in front of him, fingers twitching at her sides. "I thought I knew what revenge would feel like," she said. "But after I pulled the blade from his gut, I didn't feel powerful. I felt empty." Thomas nodded slowly. "I don't feel empty now," she added. Her voice had dropped a notch. There was heat beneath it. He reached for her hand, tugging gently until she stepped between his knees. His hands found her hips, thumbs dragging slow circles through the fabric. "You saved a cause," he said. "You still want to save a man?" She leaned in, hands braced on his shoulders. "No," she whispered. "I want to ruin him in the best way." Her mouth found his before he could answer. The kiss was slow at first, careful, searching, then deeper. She tasted of mint tea and tension, the bitter ache of days spent coiled too tightly. His hand slid up her back, under her blouse, fingertips skimming skin that made him shiver. She pulled the shirt over his head with care, eyes darting down to the bandage, then back to his face. "Tell me if I hurt you." "Too late," he said. "You already did." Her smile returned, hungrier this time. She unfastened her own blouse slowly, deliberately. He watched each button fall open, revealing the rise of her breasts, the line of her ribs, the curve of her waist. She let the fabric drop, standing bare in the firelight, eyes locked to his. He reached for her again, fingers sliding over her stomach, upward, thumbs grazing the edges of her breasts until she exhaled a sharp, trembling breath. When she climbed into his lap, his body arched into hers, his mouth finding her throat. "You should be resting," she whispered. "I've done enough of that." They moved like two people who had nearly died, because they had. There was no performance, no games, only breath and skin, the press of knees and elbows and open mouths. Her hand slid down his chest, relearning every line of him. She kissed the scar beneath his collarbone, then the one just below his ribs, new, raw. The bandage shifted aside with care. He hissed softly, not from pain, but from the sensation of her lips there. "Eliza," he murmured, like the name itself steadied him. She looked up at him, eyes dark, cheeks flushed, her hair falling forward as she reached for his belt. He let her undo it slowly, watching her hands, breathing harder now as she brushed the fabric down over his hips, freeing him. She paused, her palm wrapped around him, testing the weight and warmth of him in her hand. His breath hitched, and she smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in awe, as if she hadn't known it could feel like this. "You're beautiful," she whispered. Thomas laughed once, low in his throat, his hand sliding up her thigh. "That's supposed to be my line." "Then say it when I believe you." She leaned forward, kissed him again, longer this time, deeper, and when she shifted in his lap, her thighs bracketing his hips, he gripped her tight, anchoring himself in her body as if the world outside no longer mattered. She straddled him, guiding him inside her with a slowness that nearly undid them both. He buried his face against her shoulder, hands gripping her thighs. She rocked gently at first, testing, learning the new rhythm between them, then deeper, bolder. He gasped when she tightened around him, her nails dragging lightly down his back. "Eliza," he whispered. "I know." They didn't speak again for a long while. When they finally collapsed together on the cot by the fire, her head resting on his chest, his fingers moved in idle circles along her spine. Outside, the snow had started again, blanketing the fields in silence. Inside, the blade lay on the table, clean now, drying in the firelight. Between them, it was no longer needed. Epilogue. Spring came late that year. By the time the frost lifted from the fields around Valley Forge, word of the Loyalist plot had spread through every command post from Boston to Yorktown. 3 high-ranking traitors had been taken into custody. 2 others had vanished. Nathaniel Ward's body was never officially identified. Only the blood-stained waistcoat, delivered anonymously to a Continental safehouse. The cipher, the original, and the packet Eliza carried remained under lock and key, marked only with her father's initials. She and Thomas arrived at the Continental encampment on horseback, tired and road-worn. No fanfare greeted them, no trumpets, just a quiet nod from the officer at the gate, who led them to a tent lined with maps and guarded by men who didn't smile. They were debriefed, questioned, their evidence reviewed, their story retold. Eliza gave names, Thomas gave dates. No one doubted them. When it was done, they were offered warm food, a cot, and orders, if they wanted them. They accepted neither. Not yet. Instead, they rode south again. Not far, just far enough. A stone cottage waited on a hillside above the Schuylkill River. It wasn't much, but it had a hearth, a door that locked, and a table by the window where Eliza could write again. Thomas mended gear and tended to a small garden. He still carried a pistol at his side, but his hand rested lighter on it now. At night, they lay beneath wool blankets, her head on his chest, his thumb tracing circles along her arm. They didn't talk about the blade anymore, but it sat above the mantel, clean and sheathed, just in case. And between them, finally, there was nothing left to bury, only the quiet, breathless start of something worth surviving for. Thank you for listening to A Blade Between Us. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves historical romance and high-stakes passion. New stories premiere weekly right here. Until next time, thank you for being part of the journey.